Good morning again, everybody. How we doing? Oh, come on now. That was weak. How you doing today? All right. That's so much better. That's exciting. Hey, I told you a minute ago that I have a family. I want to show you a picture of my family. I was my Bitmoji showed me as a St. Louis Cardinals fan, and just don't hold it against me if you're that other team or another one of those teams. But this is my family, my daughter and my son, who are awesome, and my wife, who is especially awesome. And we were just hanging out as a family together. And a few years ago, quite a few now, but I turned 30, and my wife was super nice, and she decided to get me this amazing gift, because it's kind of a big deal when you turn 30, because you're getting old and stuff. And she gifted me something that I always wanted to do. She bought for me a ticket to go skydiving. It was amazing that she did that. I agree with you, actually. It was definitely freaky and awesome to think about. At first, I woke up on my birthday, and she's like, hey, I have some things planned for you today. And she had this whole day planned, and the pinnacle of the day was me going skydiving. And then we go to this restaurant for lunch, and I walk in, and there are my siblings. Now, my siblings are grown at this point, and they live in other states. And she had gotten my family all together, and it was a big celebration. And my sister was going to go skydiving with me. My sister's 8 years younger than me. We were excited. We showed up at the skydiving place. They're telling us, they start off with all the things that could go wrong and how terrible your life could be if you, do something wrong while skydiving and you could not have a life anymore and those kinds of things. They scare you with all that stuff. And then I'm getting a little bit freaked out, but also excited. You know that feeling when you're kind of super scared, but you're also really excited at the same time? Kind of like being a freshman, right? It's a little bit like that. We got really excited, and then they got to the point where they were telling us all this stuff about skydiving. They're showing us these videos of how exciting it is and how I'm going to be strapped in, what they call tandem, to another person. Everything is exciting, and then, you know the point in the story where you're telling a story and you kind of have everything so far was not really that much of a story, but something happened at that point? In my story of skydiving, it was the and then moment was when Bart came out. Bart was my tandem instructor. Bart came out, and he looked like about a fifth grader with a beard. Bart was about 4'10", and he was walking out, and his eyes were kind of closed. He looked like he was half awake. I wanted to get him a cup of coffee and ask him if he had stayed up all night. And I got to tell you that I did not have my confidence full in Bart. All right? Bart walks out, and he's like mumbling something to me about how we're going to strap in together, and he's going to save my life and keep me from falling to my imminent death out of an airplane. I did not feel safe with Bart, okay? It was not awesome. I look over at my sister, and she has this like 23-year-old football-looking dude, and he's like, we're going to be fine. We're going to be in tandem. I'm going to take care of everything. She looks over at me, and she's like, it's going to be great. How did I get Bart? How did I get that, right? I'm not feeling good about my life. I'm like, 30 was great for a couple of hours. I made it to 30, but this is it, right? We go up into the airplane, and we get to the point where they throw open the door. In fact, I think I have a picture of me and Bart hanging out. There we are, literally hanging out, okay? That's me and Bart. You can see that I'm the taller person. You may not be able to see Bart because he's the size of a leprechaun behind me. I wasn't really sure how this was going to go because Bart was supposed to save my life. So we jump out of the airplane, and actually, I didn't know this, but you have to go up to the edge of the airplane, and when you do, you actually roll forward and flip immediately. So if you weren't committed, you are at that moment. And Bart was behind me. And it was so scary. There was like this risk-reward with that day of skydiving, and it kind of works like that in life, and so much of faith is really like that too. Every single day this week, we're going to be together in the mornings, and we're going to open God's Word, and we're going to look at some stories through the life of a guy by the name of Peter. In fact, we're going to look at a story today, and the story today is in Matthew chapter 14. If you have a Bible, I'd love for you to flip there, Matthew chapter 14. Matthew 14 is a story about Peter because Peter is one of the disciples. Now, if you don't know anything about Peter, if you've never heard of Peter, or maybe you've never realized anything about Peter, he's one of my favorite characters in all the Bible because Peter was called out of fishing. He was a fisherman, and Peter was a professional guy on the water. He knew how to do the nets. He knew how to do the boats. He knew everything there was to do about the salt life. Some of you guys can appreciate that from Florida and stuff. There's all kinds of things to know about being in that world. And all of a sudden, Jesus calls him out of that to being a disciple, a follower of Jesus, a fisher of men. Peter is the guy who, when you're in a crowd and there's like an awkward silence, there's always one person who immediately speaks up and says something kind of awkward and kind of funny at the same time. Do you know who that guy is? Do you know that? Can you think of that person in your life? That's Peter. He's always got something to say. He's always jumping out with a word. And so Peter is with the other disciples. But the cool thing about the story as we look at the Gospels is so many times Peter rises to the surface. He's the guy that you can find always in the middle of the action. Something about his personality or how God made him. It was like always Peter is right in the middle of the center of the action. Peter is the guy that you're like, well, this was happening, and then Peter. Peter did something. Peter was a part of something. Peter is like in the middle of all the action. Today we're looking at a story from Matthew chapter 14, and I want to begin in verse 22, and we're going to set it up, all right? Verse 22 says this. I'm reading from the NLT, New Living Translation, if you're using a digital Bible. Immediately after Jesus feeds the 5,000, if you know that story, and if not, go back and read it later. Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake, while he sent the people home. And after sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Verse 24. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble. Oh, there it goes, right? The story is getting good. The disciples were in trouble. But I thought maybe just to illustrate how in trouble the disciples were, we need to use a couple of you guys to just sort of act out being disciples. And this morning, Paul selected a couple of you guys at breakfast. So if you were selected as one of the people to come help me out, come on up here. Hustle up here real quick. Some of you guys were selected. And if you were not selected, this is a bad joke. All right, did Paul talk to anybody? I need some disciples. Come up here. Somebody who's going to be willing to. You with your hand up. You're willing. Come. You. Yankees hat. Yes. You. Come. You. Yes, you. Yeah. You. And you and you. Okay, come on. Yeah, both of you guys. Let's see, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Way more than I need. Okay, great. You guys, take your time. We're not in a hurry at all. It's totally fine. Hey, we're going to talk through this story, and I want you to look at the story as it relates. Now, you guys are going to be some of the characters. Just come over here, line up right here on this black line, all right? Just hang out right there, go down a little further. Yeah, right there. Just line up next to them. Awesome. Line up. Awesome. Great. You guys come back here. Okay, here's how this is going to work, all right? Let's see who the most spiritual person, probably you. Okay, you're going to be Jesus. Now, not everybody, there's your name tag. Hello, my name is Jesus. Good luck with that, okay? Because he's the Son of God and stuff. And the rest of you guys are going to be disciples, okay? So you are going to be, you want to be Peter? You're kind of a major character. You think you should be? Okay, who do you want to be? Andrew? So let's see, Peter, Andrew. Who are some of the other disciples? Right, James? John, is your name John by chance? Okay, and actually I'm Judas. That's you, sorry. Hey, you got to be somebody, right? And you guys are like other disciples that we don't really know their names that well. They're not really that important, actually. I'm sorry. Just the way it is, all right? So here's how this is going to go. Jesus, where are you? Come here, Jesus. You come over here. Remember, Jesus is up in the hills, and the disciples were in trouble. So you guys need to get together right in this area and be in a boat, okay? You're in a boat. You're on the water, and he's the only guy in the boat. Okay, fantastic. Here's what I want you to do. Jesus, you just kind of hang out over here because you're up in the hills praying. There you go. Okay. Well done. Okay, here we go. We're going to pick up the story in verse 24. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from the land, for a strong wind had risen. Right, and they were fighting heavy waves. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. Just be like Jesus. It's okay. Yeah, there you go. I'm sure that's how he walked. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out in unison, "It's a ghost!" That's great. But Jesus, who was still facing the crowd, spoke to them at once, and he said to them, "Don't be afraid. Take courage, I am here." Awesome. Then Peter called to him. Peter, are you ready? Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." crazy stuff. And Jesus said, yes, come. So Peter went over the side of the boat. Nice. Excellent. Come back here, Jesus. Peter went over the side of the boat, and he walked on the water toward Jesus. Well, it's just like he's walking on a tightrope. It's amazing. But when he saw the strong wind and waves, he was terrified, and he began to sink. Yeah, terrified. Super scared. Save me, Lord, he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him by his hair. I'm just kidding, that's not in there. That's not in there. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. And he said, you have so little faith. Why did you doubt me? They climbed back into the boat. Yeah, they. And the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshiped him. And they said, you really are the Son of God. Fantastic. I give them all a hand. They did a good job with that. You guys are good. Thank you so much. Thank you. You get to keep your name tags, okay? High fives. I know. Yeah, go back to your seat. Bye. See ya. Hey, listen, that story is amazing. When you think about the fact that what happened in that story is that Jesus is doing something special and showing us something. It's such a crazy, unique story. And I got to think to myself, what did Peter think? What did he think when he went through that experience? What could it have been like for Peter? I noticed three major things about Jesus' encounter with Peter in that story. When you look at that story, think about it. Jesus met them exactly where they were. They were in the middle of a storm, going crazy, freaking out, and Jesus met them exactly where they were. Now, this is the crazy part to me. If you think about who you're dealing with, most of these guys are fishermen. They spend all their time on boats, dealing with storms, dealing with waves, dealing with the nets and the fish and all the elements. They're constantly dealing with that stuff. But something must have been unique about this one. Now, fishing on the Sea of Galilee, they expected storms. I mean, it was not uncommon at all for a storm to kind of rise up. They get out into the water. It seems peaceful. And just the way that the area is, you can have a storm rise up very quickly on the Sea of Galilee. It was not abnormal for that to happen. And this one must have been really bad because it was so bad that the disciples were terrified. They are freaking out. And Jesus met them exactly where they were, right in the middle of their storm. And when you think about your life, maybe you're in the middle of a storm right now. Maybe you're in a situation where you are going through a storm. Or maybe you're going to be going into a storm soon. Maybe you're just come out of a season where you are in a storm. And here's the amazing thing about Jesus. He meets people right in the middle of their storm. It's pretty rare that Jesus takes the entire storm away. He doesn't usually show up and just erase everything about the storm. Notice he doesn't do that until the very end of the story. But Jesus meets them right in the middle of their storm. And here's the thing about this week, guys, as we jump in today. You have a decision to make about how you're going to handle this week. You get to decide about your attitude and about your focus and about how you're going to meet Jesus in this week. He is here. He is ready to meet you right in the middle of this storm, this craziness that is this world and this week. He's ready to meet you in the middle of all the things that you're dealing with in your heart, in your life. And you've got to decide, am I willing to meet him? Am I going to be open to recognizing that Jesus is here? He has something for me. He wants to teach me something and show me something about who he is. Am I willing to really go there with my heart? Because Jesus will meet you right exactly where you are. Jesus met them in the storm. I also noticed this. Jesus came at a really weird time. Did anybody else notice that? Do you remember what time it was when Jesus showed up? 3 a.m. Guys, nothing good's happening at 3 a.m., okay? Absolutely nothing functional is happening at 3 a.m., okay? There was a few times in college where I did an all-nighter to try to study because I had a test. I don't know who came up with that idea because then you're a zombie the whole next day. But about 3 o'clock is when I start using different languages that I don't really know because I'm not coherent anymore. Nothing normal happens at 3 a.m. The disciples are exhausted. They're completely at their wits' end. It is the absolute middle of the night, and that is when Jesus chooses to show up. In your life, sometimes Jesus doesn't show up when you think he should. Sometimes he doesn't show up when it seems like would be a great time for him to show up. Sometimes you might be asking, where is Jesus anyway? I mean, I'm dealing with all these things. I'm going through all these experiences in my life. Where's Jesus? The reality is Jesus is nearby. And he is going to show up in your life at exactly the time when you really need him to, in exactly the way that you need him to. Jesus shows up at his own times because he knows best what time we need him. I don't know if you've ever felt that way before, but here's the deal. Part of trusting in Jesus is recognizing that he knows best what you need. He is the one that knows best. Now, in the story, did you notice what happened? Is Jesus is walking on the water. Jesus could have done anything he wanted. He's Jesus. He could have gone out there near the boat and all of a sudden just been and the little boat appeared underneath him, and then he just kind of rose up to them. And they're kind of like, Jesus, how are you rowing in this massive storm? But you have a boat. That's normal. That's not what he does. He shows up in a supernatural way to show them that he is a supernatural God. He shows up in the middle of their storm at a time when they least expected it to show them that he has control way bigger than the situations they were right in the middle of. He's always there in the midst of your storm, and he's going to do things in a way that you don't necessarily expect him to do them because he is God. And if you are willing to just sort of let go for a second of the control that we naturally want to have, the thing that we naturally want to do is just hold on tight to all of the control of our lives and our heart and our direction and our future. Our nature is to hold on tight. And yet Jesus is saying, would you recognize for 1 minute? Would you just recognize that I am beyond all those things? I am bigger than all those things. You can trust me more than you can trust even your own experience or even your own knowledge or even the people in your life that are trustworthy. And I'm sure you have some, and that's fantastic. You can trust Jesus beyond those things. He's going to show up in your life in ways that you would never expect him to show up. Jesus does that. Sometimes he shows up in the storms. Sometimes he shows up through the waves, so loud that we don't even hear that his voice is calling. But he shows up at odd times. Then Jesus does one other thing that was kind of the pinnacle of the story. It's kind of the and then moment, right? Jesus calls Peter out of the boat. Now, really that's a little bit of a stretch because Peter started it, right? I mean, can you imagine being in the boat? It's scary, you're freaking out, but it's kind of normal, okay? You're all going through a scary thing together as disciples. Rowing like crazy, super tired, wondering if the storm is ever going to end. You're looking at each other like, are we going to make it through this? And then Jesus comes walking on the water. Super weird moment, but Peter takes it to the weird level that has never been experienced before. He screams out onto the water, Lord, if it is you, tell me to come out there. Now, I think this is a great phrase, right? Lord, if it's you, I can't quite tell. There's a storm raging all around me. I can't really tell if it's you or not. Jesus, is that you? Tell me if it's you. Now, isn't that funny? Because, when you ask somebody, is that you? They can always answer with, yes, it is me. That could have been anybody, right? If they were thinking it was a ghost, they were thinking it was a demon, they were thinking all kinds of stuff. It could have been anybody. But Peter says, Lord, if that is you, call me. Literally, the original text could be translated that Peter said, command me out of the boat. And all the other disciples, immediately in that moment, this is not in the text, I just think this is what happened. In unison, they all went, are you kidding me right now? The only thing we have to hold on to in life right now is this boat. The only reason we are still alive is because we have been on this boat so many times. We know exactly how to go through the storm. We know exactly what to do. We know how to handle a boat. And you are asking him to call you out of the boat? Are you kidding me right now? What in the world are you doing, Peter? Are you nuts? And I think that, again, I think some of those guys that look at Jesus and they're like, tell him no. Tell him to sit down. Tell him to sit down right now. Peter, we don't have time to rescue you right now. This is not one of those times when we're looking forward to your craziness. Sit down. Sit down and start rowing. We don't have time for that, and that's not what Jesus does. Jesus looks back at Peter and he says, yes, come. Now, I don't know if that feels weird to you, but in the middle of a storm, right? The waves are crashing like crazy, like going over the boat. It's raining, lightning all around. You don't know if you're going to get struck with lightning. You don't know if you're going to get capsized or the waves are going to hit you. Jesus is walking on the water and he's like, yes, come. It just seems so peaceful. Like Jesus isn't fazed at all by the storm. And Peter in that moment decides to do what nobody else decided to do. He gets up, he steps over the edge of that boat, and he walks on water toward Jesus. Can you believe that he did that? He took a step that no one else had in his group was willing to take. He took a step that was a step toward Jesus that was into unknown. He was sitting in the middle of known. He understood how to handle a boat in a storm. What he didn't know is how to walk on water. He'd never walked on water before. Any of you guys tried to walk on water before? Anybody like run out into a lake thinking, I think I could get a few feet, and just all of a sudden, right? It just doesn't work very well. We're not very good at water walking, but here's the trick. Jesus actually made you for water walking. He did. Not literal water walking, not for you to be able to do tricks at your church camp or something. This is not for you to show off. Jesus made your life for water walking. He made you to go somewhere and to be a part of something and to experience something that you could never ever do in your own power. Something that you could never dream was possible on your own. Something that is so far beyond your comfort zone, something that is so far beyond what you already know, that he looks at you. And this week and today, as we start the very first full day, he looks at you and he says, yes. Come on. Come on. Take a step out. Take one step over the edge of that boat and walk toward me. And that's exactly what Peter does. Now, what happens with Peter's story? Just like almost every story with Peter, something amazing happens, and then amazing, right? He's walking on the water. Can you imagine what Peter looks like when he's looking around and the other disciples are like, what did he just do? Have you ever been in one of those situations where you think like, this is a really stupid idea, and then somebody does it, and everybody's like, genius. That was amazing. That's what happens with Peter, right? Everybody's like, you're an idiot. Sit down. What are you doing? Oh, man, that's awesome. 11 guys decided that day to stay in what they knew as comfortable. 11 guys looked at rational thought and said, this is safe. But there was one big difference between what Peter did and what those other 11 guys did. See, Peter recognized who was on the water. His name is Jesus. And there's one really good reason for Peter to get out of that boat. Because the water is where Jesus was. The water is where Jesus was. And Peter already knew in his short experience as a disciple of Jesus, he had spent time fishing. He had been in boats. He had seen everything about what normal life looked like and what everybody told him was supposed to be normal. But he knew one thing was different, is that when he was with Jesus, something came alive in him. Something was different. Something was challenging. Something was comforting. Something was scary, but at the same time fulfilling. And he knew that the best thing for him to do was to be where Jesus was. So Peter stepped out of the boat. He walked on water, and then like many of us, he, again, real quick, realized those waves are really, really big. And he started to sink. I don't know if Peter was embarrassed. I don't know if he was embarrassed or if he was humiliated or if he was excited, or I'm not really sure. Like in that moment, Jesus grabs him down and picks him up and says, why do you have such little faith? Now, that's always startled me too, right? Why do you have such little faith? I'm thinking, little faith. Little faith. I don't get it. Peter's the only dude who got out of the boat. He's the only one who was willing to be like, I think I could probably walk on water. This is not like, glass, crystal-looking lake thing. This is waves crashing like crazy. Even if you were a water walker, you wouldn't get out of the boat on that day. He had faith to step out, but Jesus looked at him and said, why such little faith? Here's the thing. Jesus knows that we're going to fall. He knows that if we take our eyes off of him, we're going to fall down, and yet he is right there to reach out a hand and pull us right back up. The difference between Peter walking on the water and Peter sinking was simply one thing. He took his eyes off Jesus. He took his eyes off Jesus. He didn't see Jesus for who he really was in that moment. He let the voices of the waves and the crashing sound of all the storms in his life sink him in that moment. Friends, here's the great thing about this week. You have an opportunity. You're away from home. You are saturated in an environment where you get to look into God's word. You get to spend time talking to youth leaders and friends about your faith. You get to explore really the truths of Jesus. And I know that we're on all different spectrums. Some of you are here this week and you are completely sold out and you're saying, I just want to have more faith. I want to be willing to take steps out water walking into places that are super scary to me, that I can never imagine how I'm ever going to walk on water like that, but I'm willing. I want to step out. And some of you are going, I'm not so sure. I'm just kind of hanging out in the boat. I just want to be here for a while. The great thing about this week is you get to explore this week Jesus. Through the lens of this guy, Peter, we get to explore the truth of this person, Jesus. The real question, of course, is, what's your boat? What is your boat? What is the thing that is holding you back? What is the thing that you need to say, I'm going to let go a little bit of the boat, of normal, of what I've always thought it was supposed to be like, and put my eyes focused on the person of Jesus. And for this week, even if for only this week, would you be willing to go there? Be willing to go there and say, I want to put my eyes on Jesus and see where that takes me, because you were made for water walking. What is your boat? And are you willing to take a step out? Let's pray together. God, you are an amazing God. We sing songs about you. We proclaim the truth about you. Being a God who knows all, who is everywhere, who knows not only the creation of the world, but every intimate, small, insignificant thought that we have in our brains. You care about every detail of our lives. And we, this very first day of Move, full day that we have together, are willing to just say, we're here. We're here and we're willing, Lord, to take a step, to put our eyes focused on you, to see you for who you really are, and to see if maybe you're willing to take us somewhere. Maybe you want to take us somewhere that is beyond what we've ever dreamed. And God, we ask that today you would help us to have the courage to do that. In Jesus' name we pray.